Just a quick disclaimer, I am not Robert Holland. Robert is a bit under the weather tonight, and so he has asked me to fill in. I will do the best I can. I am not as versed on Robert's material as he is, but we will try to do our best. If you would, before we get started, turn over to 1 Kings, probably 9, 10, in that area. We'll be doing a lot of work from there. But before we get started, I have a little bit of a pop quiz, some information I need to know. Anywhere in the country, where would you say you're going to find the best Mexican food? Where? San Antonio, Texas. Anybody else? Mexican food. I've got 2 votes for San Antonio, and I'd have to make 3 because I agree. Where? Colorado's pretty good. Another one for San Antonio? Tucson? Well, Mexico's not in the United States, so that doesn't count. Not yet. A lot of Mexico is coming to the United States, but we're not there yet. But if I was looking for Mexican food, yeah, it's probably going to be down there around that Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California corridor, you think? Why is that? Chili peppers. Well, that was not the answer I was looking for, but yeah?
51% are Mexicans.
Albuquerque.
So we've got Mexicans in San Antonio, so that would explain a lot of the food choices, right? Right. It's the culture. It is people who have moved from one point to the other and brought their culture with them. All right, second question. Get ready, this is a little tougher. Because I know that I'm going to get at least 1 vote for Chicago. Where are you going to find the best pizza?
America.
New York? Detroit. See, well, okay. I thought you'd go with Chicago, but Detroit. New York? Philadelphia? My wife would vote for Philadelphia. Why? Just ignore him. Why would you find the best pizza in places like New York and Philadelphia and Detroit or Chicago? Do I? The water? No, they're wrong. It's not the water. What is it? It's the Italians. My PJ's grandmother was, I think I told some of you this story, when I got married, she lived in Cape May, New Jersey, and the night of our rehearsal, we drove from Villanova, Pennsylvania to Cape May, New Jersey to spend the night at her house. We got there about 2 a.m. At 2 a.m., she had enough pizza, lasagna, salad, not a lot of salad, pepperoni bread, you name it. She had enough to serve 25, 30 people at 2 a.m. And it's just the 4 or 5 of us that were in my wedding party. But she used to run an Italian restaurant, and she spoke very little English because that was part of her culture. That was the things that she knew that she brought from, or her mother had brought from the old country, if you will. So what you see, and then there's one more. I got one more. Where are you going to find the best Chinese food? Chinatown, San Francisco, New York, Chinatown. And what are all these things have in common? People who have come from another country, they've brought their culture and most notably their food choices with them. But it's not just the food choices. Those are the things that are easiest for us to relate to. It is for me because I like food. I like a lot of food. And so I know about all of these things, and those are the things that are relatable to me. But they also bring their culture. And what we've been studying on Wednesday nights is the impact of culture. And when we talk about what was the Israelite culture, during the time of the kings, for instance, we often think of it in terms of, and I'm teaching the family class, we're going to get into things like polygamy and things along those lines. But if you think of it in the context of their culture, it becomes a whole lot different than thinking of it in terms of our culture. There are things that we are used to because we live in the 21st century that would have been foreign to them, and those things are foreign to us when we look back at what they did and some of the practices and cultures that they had. So we'll be looking into that. Somebody turn over to 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 10. 1 Kings chapter 10, let's start with verse 14, and we're going to go through 21. 1 Kings 10, 14 through 21. Who's got it? Just start with it. In fact, they used silver like a paperweight, I think. It was kind of like, I think in one translation says it was like rocks. Silver was treated like rocks. So, quick question. Who knows the answer to this one? What's a talent? There's always the question about what's a cubit. We've got that one nailed. What's a talent? Does anybody know? No. 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 Here, we're going to do math. We're going to do math in this class. If you have your calculators and or phones with a calculator on it, whip those out. Let's go. We're going to do math. You ready? I checked this afternoon as I was preparing for the lesson, and gold at this point in time is $2,195 per ounce. Okay, you got that? $2,195 per ounce. 16 ounces in a pound, right? Unless they've changed it. 16 ounces in a pound. So multiply 16,000 times 2,100, or 16 ounces times 2,195. 35,120, right? All right. A talent was roughly the equivalent. It's the largest measurement in the ancient world. There's actually a number of different definitions of talent depending on the culture, background, where you came from. The Israelites adopted the Babylonian talent. And so as we talk about it here, we'll be talking in terms of what they call the Babylonian talent. Multiply the, what was it, 35,120? A talent was roughly 60 pounds. 60 pounds of gold. So multiply 35,120 times 60. Do what?
$2,107,200.
2,100,000. So a talent was 2,100,000 and roughly, okay, nearly 2.2 million, right? Now, to understand what Solomon was bringing in, multiply that by 666. 1.543 billion. Little over $1.5 billion a year coming in gold. And it says that's besides what he's making on trading, et cetera, et cetera. Fairly wealthy man. To put this in another term, again, more math. Put this in another term. A Babylonian talent was said to equal 6,000 denarii. And Jerry, this goes back to what you said before. A denarii was a single day's wage. 1 denarii was a single day's wage. So if you estimate roughly 300 working days a year when you take out Sabbaths and feast days, that's roughly, a talent is about 20 years' wages. That is no small sum. And how did Solomon amass this fortune on a regular basis? It talks about it. With all the trading, everything that's going through here, that goes through the land of Canaan, these are some of the things that Robert has talked about over the last little bit. We're on a significant trade route. See, I think one of these is oh, there we go. There's Canaan. And look at how all the trade routes coming into the Mediterranean Sea kind of come through Canaan. It's kind of right there in the catbird seat.
Christians know we're going to heaven, isn't it?
That's exactly right. We'd like to be in the middle of things. And you know, if you think about it, the Israelites had an opportunity here. And they dropped the ball miserably. But if you have access to this number of people, all coming through your land and your area, what's your opportunity? Trade, and they were doing that. They were excelling at the trade part of it. Evangelism. But what happened? They loved gold. And what did that translate to? Sin. Well, why? You know, we had the example of the pizza and the Mexican food. What happens when people bring their cultures in? Their cultures tend to stay. And so what you were running into in this scenario is these people from all over the world, all over the known world at that time, all over the world coming in through Canaan. And where Canaan had the opportunity to, I guess for lack of a better term, evangelize or show the world how it was meant to be, they fell flat. Turn over to I believe it's 1 Kings 15. Nope, 1 Kings 11. Next chapter. 1 Kings 11. But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, "You shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods." Solomon clung to these in love. It's very likely, given that the scenario that they had here, that a lot of these marriages were essentially treaties. I will marry this king's daughter and this king's daughter, and we'll have a treaty and we'll trade together. And that's what happened. But Solomon, instead of holding fast his belief and his faith and leading, what did he do? Verse 3, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. And I don't know that we listen to this next part or understand this part from a cultural perspective very, very often. But as I looked down through the types of altars and the types of temples that Solomon built specifically for his wives, there's some pretty scary characters in here. You may not think about it. You think, we worship the Baals and we worship this and he's going to do that and it's not too bad. Well, for instance, for it was when Solomon was old that his wife turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord, as with the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, goddess of the Sidonians. Ashtoreth, you know what she is? Goddess of fertility. Sexual immorality. Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. An abomination. I'll explain that in a minute because there's some other ones. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, did not fully follow the Lord as did his father David. Built a high place for Shemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem. For Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Why was Molech called an abomination? Why was Shemosh called an abomination? Why was Milcom called an abomination? Anybody know? Yes, sir?
Molech have to do with child sacrifice?
All of them did. All of those gods required human sacrifice. Every one of them. So we think in terms of Solomon saying, I'll do this to appease my wife. Well, you don't understand how far down that slippery slope Solomon had to go to get there. This was not a matter of, yeah. You go to church on Sundays, I'm going to sit home and watch football. This was, I will build you a temple so that you can sacrifice other human beings to your false god. And they're all children.
That's even the hardest part it should have been for him. Except, it's because they were his children too.
That's right. That's right. And I guess if you've got 700 wives and 300 concubines or whatever, then... But you see how the culture, given Solomon's background, he was the son of David, a man after God's own heart. And it took one generation where he goes from his father, a man after God's own heart, to sacrificing children on behalf of his wives. You don't think culture's strong? We deal in very similar culture. I mean, we're not sacrificing children yet, but we're getting close. We just call it abortion. All right, I digress. We're talking about the amount of money that Solomon made. We'll go back a little bit. We see in 1 Kings 5, 7 through 11, the agreement between Solomon and Hiram, king of Tyre. Apparently, Solomon and Hiram were very tight. In fact, at one point, Solomon gives Hiram something like 20 cities, and Hiram says, I don't want these. They're not very good cities. And so, to make up for it, Hiram sends Solomon 120 talents of gold. I don't know. That's an interesting return policy. Hiram was the king of Tyre, by the way, and I understand that he was helping Solomon with the shipping industry. Let me see where that one is. I believe that's going to be in the last part of, last part of chapter 9, 1 Kings. King Solomon also built a fleet of ships at Eslon Geber, which is near Elath, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. Then Hiram sent his servants with the fleet, seamen who knew the sea, to work with the servants of Solomon, and they went to Ophir and acquired 420 talents of gold from there and brought it to King Solomon. So there's 420 talents of gold as a shipping investment. And he brought this from Ophir. I don't know, so up until recently, Ophir was considered a mythical place. They couldn't find any evidence of it in the Bible or in archaeology until they ran across this. It's apparently a receipt where they had gold from Ophir to Beth Horon, 30 shekels. So there's some, again, archaeology eventually proves the Bible right, I guess. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is this shows Solomon's reach across the known world at the time. Yet it wasn't him that was influencing culture. He was being influenced by culture. And it's some of the same things we deal with today.
I in here say that's married, he's not influenced by his wife.
Well, actually, we should be influenced by our wives.
I know, we should be.
We should. It's just finding the right wife, isn't it, Joe?
And it's finding a Christian.
That's exactly right.
That's the key.
That's exactly right. Thoughts that you have? Okay, I think I'm getting there. So again, let's go back to where. There's the area we're talking about right there. There's all of the different trade or everybody that surrounds them, if you will. What did God tell them to do about this in Deuteronomy 7? Somebody turn over to Deuteronomy 7. We're going to start, let's do verse 3 through 5. Deuteronomy 7, 3 through 5.
You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons, or taking their daughters for your sons. For they will turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. But thus shall you deal with them. You shall break down their altar and dash in pieces their pillars, and chop down their Asherim, and burn their carved images with fire.
Did Solomon do that? Because he was influenced by culture as opposed to being the culture that influenced. And back to Joe's point, I think we sometimes miss the point. A lot of this has to do with the fact that Solomon was a very, very wealthy man, but he accumulated this wealth by making alliances. There's not a lot of money in destroying your enemies when you can trade with your enemies.
I know you know this, and I'm sure several others, working this idea with the bank and at the level I was fortunate to be at. Nearly every one of the people above me, male or female, have had a divorce at least once. Mm-hmm. It's sad to say, but you go around and you look at the companies and you talk to them and you meet with those top management people. Nearly every one of them had a divorce. Now, that's not true in all cases, but I'd say 75% of the cases.
And why do you think that was, Joe?
Because of money? They were in power.
Money and power. And there's the scripture that says you can't serve God and mammon. Well, you can't effectively serve a household and mammon either. Yep, it is. When it's a culture of more all the time. Sure is.
And there's not one that works anywhere for somebody else that you not want to get that pay increase, or you want to get the next step. And there's nothing wrong with that.
It's what you're going to do to get it.
I was going to say, it's what you do when you get there, and how do you treat other people, and how do you look at yourself.
That's right. That's right. Keaton?
You know, one chapter before, you were reading out of Deuteronomy 7, Deuteronomy 6 is one of my favorites, talking about families. I'm sure you'll get to it at some point. Because it's talking about every step of the way, teaching the next generation what it means to serve God. And you know, the section here talks about placing it on your doorpost, like the insinuation that every time you go in and out, there's an understanding that you're going out into the world, but you're God's. And when you come home, you're a part of the family that is God's, and there's the leadership structure that's there, and that's all Deuteronomy 6 is. It's talking about your children and your life and the way you present yourself and keeping God at the forefront of your life, and then it flows right into 7, which begins talking more about the family and marriage and things like this. It's not these little isolated bits of wisdom. It's all one big plan of. You know, and God tells his people, listen, if you'll follow this, I'll bless you. You know, I'll give you what you want, but you got to follow my plan. And that's not untrue now.
When do you start learning your culture?
That you're born.
Really early.
Really early.
Yeah.
I think the Catholic Church will teach, if you can get the child for the first 5 or 6 years of their life, you'll be a Catholic the rest of your life.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way we need to start training. You train them to be a Christian in that beginning, on you have a much better chance of them remaining a Christian for the rest of their life.
Those of you who have young children, or some of you have had young children. I had young children. But think back, and this kind of goes hand in hand with what Joe was talking about, with family versus work. And I will tell you, my wife and I worked, and our kids were at daycare. Fortunately, we had daycare with a Christian woman. But from the time our children are born till the time they leave the house, they probably spend more time in the company of others than they do with us. Either at daycare or at school. You're spending, I don't know, what is it? You get to about 7 hours at school, 5 days a week. And, you don't have a lot of control over what goes on at school. In fact, most of the teachers will tell you they don't have a whole lot of control over what goes on at school. In fact, probably the biggest influence on your children at school are other children. And so when they talk about, here in Deuteronomy, when they talk about the fact that, and Keaton brought up the fact, teach them to your children when they go in, put them on your doorstep. We don't see our children that much. Because that 30 minutes of a morning and maybe a couple of hours of an afternoon, assuming they're not involved in sports or something else, that pales in comparison to the 7 hours that they're at school or with friends or getting their information from whoever's willing to share it, whether it's right or wrong. And we all grew up with it. It's peer pressure. But if you think back at the Canaanite, that's part of the culture that they were dealing with, because if you bring in these other gods and these other people from all over it's not just, we tend to think of it in terms of adults. Well, the cultures came in from all over the place, and it was kid to kid, just like it is today. people were learning at an early age that this is what's popular. This is what everybody else is doing. I don't stand out so much as long as I'm kind of going along with the crowd. And it's easy for a culture to infiltrate just like that. Yes, sir?
Joshua chapter 4. This is right on the heels of Jericho. And Joshua 4, starting in verse 4, is when God instructed them to place stones down in the Jordan. And what I find really interesting is it says, let the ark pass before you, the ark of the Lord pass before you in the midst of the Jordan, and take up each one of you a stone upon his shoulder. And then it goes on to say that this may be a sign when your children ask what these are for. You tell them what God has done.
It's teaching opportunity.
It is, but it's interesting that there's no really mention of the stones being needed for adults. Because I think the assumption is that the adults have already made up their mind about what they're going to believe and the ideology they have. But the children, they're going to ask. And they still have an opportunity to be changed. And this is a physical representation, just to your point, of how valuable, good and bad, how effective our children can be at teaching and absorbing what's around them. Because they will ask. They will pick up on, their little osmosis sponges. They will pick up on what's around them. And if you guide them and say, hey, these stones are for this reason, we have the same opportunity to point to things and say, this is why we believe what we believe. They have an opportunity to go be influential to others just the way others have the opportunity to influence them. And I don't think we do probably as good enough job as we should.
Probably not. How many of your kids have asked you why you go to church? That seems like a fairly standard question. That's one of those things that my kids ask. Why do we go to church? That's teaching opportunity. What are these stones? Why can't I go play with my friends on Sunday? Why can't I attend sports practice on Wednesday nights? Why do I have to go to church? Because, that's how culture happens. It starts with our young people. To Keaton's point, most of us have made up our minds. We know why we're here. But we have gone through the peer pressure and the struggles that we had as younger people to fit in. But our kids are just now going through it. And don't minimize it. Don't minimize it in the least. It is a struggle for them, especially when it comes to religion. All right. So we have already kind of talked ad nauseum about what the Israelites did not do as far as the foreign people. They did not take them out. They left a lot of them. And it came back to bite them over and over and over again. They kept turning back. How many times in the book of Judges, for instance, did we say, well, they went after... In fact, the kings, a lot of the kings after Solomon, there's more bad kings than good kings. And it wasn't that they were bad kings politically, it was that they were bad kings spiritually. In a theocracy, the king's supposed to be the spiritual leader. And they were leading the wrong direction. I'm not going to get into a political discussion, but I hope that your faith plays a part in how you vote. Because that's something that we shouldn't be compartmentalizing. We shouldn't say, well, I have my political beliefs over here and my religious beliefs over here. They ought to be all the same. Because you ought to have your religious beliefs and that's it, and everything else is a result of that. So anyway, I will not get on the political thing right now. Although I will tell you I'm scared to death. Exodus 23 through 4. You guys are going to, you may be able to quote this. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. So Solomon violated the first two commandments because of his wives, because of the culture that he was introduced to from the countries around him. Again, in pursuit of gold, in pursuit of wives, I don't know. Maybe that was part of it too. But we're dealing with the same issues today that Solomon did, just maybe not quite so blatant. I don't know that we have anybody that's looking to sacrifice children. There are times. No, I'm just kidding. All right, I've probably butchered Robert's lesson enough. Thoughts that you have before we wrap up? I'm probably going to give you a few minutes back. I said that, and now nobody has any comments.
I'm going to turn this around and ask, it's a question, it's actually not any sort of insight. Earlier you mentioned, they had the opportunity to influence the world around them, but instead they were influenced. On a more individual level, as members of the church in the New Testament, go and make disciples. Did the Jews? I don't remember reading much about an approach of we're going to spread Judaism. It was we are His chosen people. We don't want to get corrupted. No, they got corrupted anyway. But
Well, they did.
There was not a goal that was out.
I can't remember the verse now, but where he's talking about you blind guides, where you would travel the world to proselytize one person, and then you turn him into as rotten a snake as you are, is essentially that paraphrased. So there was a proselytization process in place for the Jews. And now, they could, in fact, the Ethiopian eunuch had been to Jerusalem to worship. As far as we know, not a Jew, but had been to Jerusalem to worship as a proselyte, probably.
We just don't get really any heavy over and over emphasis on, even though there were, like you said, there were proselytes.
Yeah.
But it was not.
But even from the standpoint of evangelizing, had they done what God had told them to do in the first place, they wouldn't have had to deal with those types of influences. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
Evangelizing thing goes, would that even have been appropriate back in those days? Because it wasn't until later that Gentiles were accepted. Like I said, the Old Testament was, like you said, more like the Israelites. That's got my people. They would pretty much destroy everybody else. It wasn't until later, where after Jesus and after they rejected him, then the message got spread to the Gentiles and other nations were accepted.
Well, the Gentiles were accepted into Christ's kingdom, into the church, absolutely. But under the Jewish law, there were opportunities for proselytes. That's what we were just kind of talking about, is that they could convert Gentiles to Jewish law. Now, they wouldn't be a Jew, obviously, but they could be converted to Jewish law.
In fact, they went through a whole set of things, which included baptism as we know it.
A purification process, essentially.
They
Yeah.
actually walked through and had to cover themselves completely with water.
Yeah, there was again a purification process for proselytes, and there was as the temple was built, there was also a court of the Gentiles. So You know, and again, accommodation for Gentiles worshiping the true God. Yes, sir.
I think you can look at a lot of examples. Jonah going to Nineveh. You got Rahab being converted by fear of what God did. There's lots and lots of examples of conversion
And we tend to think in terms of, especially in the Old Testament, because it's so centered on the Israelites. But to your point, so much of the Old Testament was not so much about just Israel. You know, to your, again, Rahab repented, said, I want to join you guys. That was fine. Nineveh. You know, Nineveh, the Assyrians were a huge thorn in the side of the Israelites for most of the time. And that's probably why Jonah didn't want to go there. He did not like those people. And they did not have a good reputation. They also offered child sacrifice and some things like that. But Jonah was told to go preach to the Ninevites, to Nineveh. All right. Thank you very much. Robert should be back next week, so something for you guys to look forward to.